May 1st, 1945, 10:26 p.m. The radio crackles in a basement in Hamburg where 17 people crowd around a single receiver, faces illuminated by candlelight. The electricity works for 2 hours each evening if they're lucky. Tonight, they're lucky. Admiral Karl Dönitz's voice cuts through the static, formal and measured, and announces that Adolf Hitler is dead. He died yesterday afternoon in Berlin, the voice says, fighting to his last breath against Bolshevism, leading his troops in the defense of the capital. The Führer has fallen. Long live Germany, the announcement ends. For 3 full seconds, no one in that Hamburg basement speaks. Then a woman in her 60s, Frau Richter, whose son was killed at Stalingrad 3 years ago, says very quietly, "Good." Her daughter grabs her arm, terrified someone outside might have heard. 2 doors down, in another basement, someone is crying. These are not the reactions of a unified people. They are the reactions of a nation that has shattered into millions of individual survival calculations, each person alone with their hunger and their fear and their memories of what they believed 6 years ago, or 1 year ago, or yesterday. In Berlin, 31-year-old Ruth Andreas Friedrich hears the announcement in her apartment in Schmargendorf. She has spent 3 years hiding Jews in her home, part of a small resistance circle that printed anti-Nazi leaflets and forged documents. She writes in her diary that night, "Hitler is dead. We look at each other in silence. Is it possible? Can this nightmare really be ending?" But her relief is complicated. Soviet artillery is 2 miles away. The city is burning. Her neighborhood has no water, no electricity, no food supplies. Hitler's death changes nothing about tomorrow morning, when she'll have to venture out to search for bread, stepping over corpses in the street. The announcement spreads through a country that barely exists anymore. Germany in May 1945 is not one nation, but 1,000 disconnected fragments. In the West, American and British troops occupy everything to the Rhine and beyond. In the East, Soviet forces control everything to the Elbe. In between, in the shrinking pocket of territory still under German control, millions of refugees clog the roads, fleeing westward, carrying what they can, leaving everything else behind. The announcement of Hitler's death reaches them in pieces, passed from person to person, often distorted, frequently disbelieved. In a village in Bavaria, already occupied by American troops for 2 weeks, Mathilde Wolf-Munkeberg, a 60-year-old mother of 6, hears the news from a neighbor who heard it from someone else. She doesn't believe it. She thinks it's Allied propaganda, another lie meant to break German morale. When an American soldier confirms it the next day, she feels nothing. "I cannot feel anything anymore," she writes to her children. "We are beyond feeling. We simply exist from hour to hour." Her house is intact, which makes her luckier than most. Her city, Hamburg, was firebombed in 1943. She spent 3 days after those raids walking through streets where the asphalt had melted, where people had been fused to the pavement, where 40,000 died in a single night. Hitler's death is just another fact in a cascade of facts too large to process. But in another part of Bavaria, in a village that will not be occupied for another 3 days, a different reaction. 16-year-old Hans Schmidt hears the announcement and cries. He has been in the Hitler Youth since he was 10. He has believed, with the pure certainty of adolescence, that the Führer would find a way, that the miracle weapons would come, that the tide would turn. His father, who lost an arm at Verdun in the First War and has watched this Second War with grim recognition, puts a hand on his son's shoulder and says nothing. There is nothing to say. The boy will learn. Everyone learns eventually. The complexity of these reactions cannot be simplified. This is not a story of a nation celebrating liberation or mourning a fallen leader. It is a story of exhaustion, confusion, fear, and the strange numbness that comes from living through catastrophe. In Berlin, where the announcement originates, most people don't hear it. The city has been under siege for 2 weeks. Soviet forces control 3/4 of the capital. The remaining defenders, a chaotic mix of Wehrmacht remnants, SS units, Hitler Youth, and Volkssturm old men, hold scattered pockets. Most civilians shelter in cellars, emerging only when absolutely necessary. Radio reception is sporadic. Information spreads through rumor. Ursula von Kardorf, a journalist who has stayed in Berlin through the siege, hears the announcement on May 2nd, a day late, from someone who heard it from someone else. She writes in her diary, "So it's over. I feel nothing. Perhaps later I will feel something. Now there is only the question of whether we will survive the next few days." Her building has been hit 3 times by artillery. The woman in the apartment below her was killed yesterday by shrapnel while trying to fetch water. Hitler's death is relevant only insofar as it might mean the fighting will stop sooner. This is the context that shapes every reaction: immediate physical danger, immediate physical need. Germany in May 1945 is a country where staying alive from morning to evening is an accomplishment. The announcement itself is carefully constructed. Dönitz does not say Hitler committed suicide. He says Hitler died fighting. This is a lie, but it's a lie designed to preserve something, some dignity, some meaning. In the basement in Hamburg, when Frau Richter says good, she is reacting to 12 years of Nazi rule, to the loss of her son, to the destruction of her city, to the knowledge that this war was lost 2 years ago and has continued anyway, killing millions more for nothing. When her daughter grabs her arm in fear, she is reacting to the fact that even now, even with Soviet and American troops occupying half the country, there are still true believers who might denounce you. Still SS men who might shoot you for defeatism. Both reactions are rational. Both are responses to the same regime, the same catastrophe, the same moment. Germany in May 1945 contains multitudes. In the east, in territories already occupied by Soviet forces, the announcement means something different. In a town in Pomerania, occupied for 6 weeks, German civilians have experienced what they feared most. The Red Army's advance through eastern Germany has been accompanied by mass rape, looting, arbitrary killings. Estimates suggest hundreds of thousands of German women were raped by Soviet soldiers in 1945. In this context, Hitler's death is irrelevant. The anonymous author of A Woman in Berlin, a diary published years later, records the announcement with a single line: "So he's dead. It changes nothing for us." She is 34 years old, living in a cellar with 8 other women, trying to stay invisible, trying to survive. The previous week, she was raped by Soviet soldiers. So are most of the women she knows. They have developed strategies. Find a Soviet officer who will claim you as his woman, which offers some protection from other soldiers. Barter sex for food. Stay hidden when possible. Move in groups. The announcement that Hitler is dead does not address any of these immediate concerns. The war will end or it won't. The soldiers will leave or they won't. She and the women with her will survive or they won't. Hitler is irrelevant. This is not callousness. This is the perspective of someone living in a state of nature, where social structures have collapsed entirely, where every day is a negotiation with chaos. But in Western Germany, in areas occupied by American or British forces, reactions are different. The occupation has been relatively orderly. There has been looting, there have been incidents, but nothing like the East. In these areas, Hitler's death prompts something closer to political reflection. In Frankfurt, occupied by Americans since late March, a 52-year-old schoolteacher named Wilhelm Müller hears the announcement and feels a complicated mixture of relief and shame. He joined the Nazi Party in 1937, not out of ideological conviction, but because it was necessary for his career. He taught the curriculum he was required to teach. He led his students in Hitler salutes. He displayed the portrait of the Führer in his classroom. He did not resist. He did not speak out. He survived by conforming. Now Hitler is dead, and Wilhelm must confront what his conformity enabled. The Americans have begun showing films of the concentration camps. He saw footage from Bergen-Belsen last week, projected on a sheet hung in the town square, mandatory viewing for all adults. The skeletal bodies stacked like cordwood, the survivors who looked like walking corpses, the mass graves. He knew there were camps. Everyone knew there were camps. But he had not known this, or he had not let himself know. The distinction feels meaningless now. When he hears Hitler is dead, his first thought is, it's over. His second thought is, what have we done? These thoughts will stay with him for the rest of his life. This reaction, this confrontation with complicity, is more common in the West, where the immediate threat to survival is less acute, where people have the mental space to begin processing what happened. But even here, reactions vary wildly. In the same town, a 28-year-old woman named Anna Becker hears the announcement and feels nothing but relief. Her husband was executed by the Gestapo in 1943 for distributing anti-war leaflets. She has spent 2 years living in fear, raising their daughter alone, waiting for them to come for her too. Hitler's death means the system that killed her husband is finally collapsing. She allows herself, for the first time in years, to hope that maybe the nightmare is ending. When she tells her daughter, age 6, that the Führer is dead, the child asks, "Does this mean Papa is coming home?" Anna has to explain again that Papa is not coming home, will never come home. Hitler's death does not undo death. In rural areas, far from cities where the war has been more abstract, reactions are different still. In a village in the Black Forest, where no bombs have fallen, where the only sign of war is the absence of young men, a 70-year-old farmer named Josef hears the announcement and shrugs. He lived through the Kaiser's war. He remembers the inflation of the 1920s, when money became worthless, when his life savings couldn't buy a loaf of bread. He remembers the chaos of the Weimar years. He remembers when Hitler came to power and things got more stable. And then there was another war. Now Hitler is dead, and there will be another government, and life will go on or it won't. He has survived regime changes before. He's not sure this one matters more than any other. His grandson, 17, who was supposed to report for military service next week, has a different reaction. He is terrified and relieved in equal measure. Terrified because he doesn't know what comes next, relieved because maybe he won't have to die after all. He has watched older boys from the village march off to war. Fewer than half came back. His best friend was killed in Normandy last summer, age 18. Another friend lost both legs in Italy. The announcement that Hitler is dead means maybe the killing will stop. Maybe he will survive. This thought fills him with guilt, because he has been taught his whole life that dying for the fatherland is the highest honor. But he doesn't want to die. He wants to live. Hitler's death gives him permission to admit this to himself. In cities, in the ruins, reactions are shaped by the sheer scale of destruction. Hamburg has been bombed repeatedly since 1943. 40% of the city is rubble. In the basement where Frau Richter said good, the people gathered around the radio have all lost something. Homes, certainly. Most have lost family members. They have spent years in bomb shelters, listening to the sirens, feeling the building shake, emerging to find their street transformed into a moonscape. They have pulled bodies from wreckage. They have gone days without food. They have burned furniture to stay warm in winter. They have watched their city die piece by piece. For them, Hitler's death is the end of the person who led them into this catastrophe. Some feel satisfaction. Some feel nothing. Some feel a terrible anger that he died in Berlin, quickly, while they have to go on living in the ruins of what he destroyed. A woman named Greta, 43, whose husband and both sons were killed in the war, listens to the announcement and thinks, he got off easy. She has to go on. She has to figure out how to survive in a city with no economy, no infrastructure, no future she can imagine. Hitler is dead, but she still has to wake up tomorrow in a city of rubble and figure out where to find food. His death solves nothing for her. But in the same basement, a young woman named Helga, 22, feels something like hope. She has been waiting for this war to end so she can start her life. She wants to fall in love, get married, have children, do all the normal things that have been impossible during 12 years of Nazi rule and 6 years of war. Hitler's death means maybe finally she can begin. She doesn't think about politics or guilt or responsibility. She thinks about the future, about possibility, about the life she might still have. This is not naivety. This is survival. She has to believe in a future or she cannot go on. The announcement reaches different people at different times, through different channels, and each person filters it through their own experience. In a hospital in Munich, a nurse tells a wounded soldier that Hitler is dead. The soldier, 24, missing his right leg, says, "What was it for then?" This is the question that will haunt Germany for generations. If the Führer is dead, if Germany has lost, if the cities are ruins and millions are dead, what was it all for? The soldier has no answer. The nurse has no answer. No one has an answer. In a refugee column on a road in Mecklenburg, trudging west away from the advancing Soviets, the announcement spreads from person to person. These are people who have lost everything. Their homes are behind Soviet lines now, either occupied or destroyed. They carry what they could fit in a cart or on their backs. They have walked for weeks. They have seen things on this road they will never speak about. They have seen people die of exhaustion, of starvation, of despair. They have seen Soviet soldiers stop columns and select women. They have learned not to look back. When they hear Hitler is dead, some cry, some laugh bitterly, some say nothing. A woman in her 50s, pulling a cart with her remaining possessions, says to no one in particular, "He promised us greatness. He gave us this." She gestures at the column of refugees, at the road, at the sky. A man nearby, walking with his elderly mother, says, "Don't speak ill of the Führer." Even now, even here, there are believers. Or perhaps he's just too tired to let go of the belief that gave his suffering meaning. This is the cruelty of the announcement. It arrives at a moment when Germany is too broken to react coherently. If Hitler's death had come in 1942, when Germany still controlled most of Europe, when victory seemed possible, the reaction would have been shock, grief, perhaps even renewed determination. If it had come in 1943, after Stalingrad, there might have been relief, a sense that maybe someone else would end the war more sensibly. But in May 1945, with Germany already defeated, with Soviet and American troops occupying the country, with cities in ruins and millions dead, Hitler's death is just another fact in an avalanche of facts. In Berlin, in the Führer bunker, where Hitler actually died, the remaining staff heard the news before the announcement, of course. They were there. They saw the body, or some of them did. They helped burn it in the garden above, or so they later claimed. These people, the true believers who stayed with Hitler to the end, had their own reactions. Some killed themselves in the following days. Some tried to flee. Some were captured by Soviet forces and spent years in prison camps. Their reactions to Hitler's death were shaped by their proximity to him, by their complicity in his regime, by their understanding that they were implicated in everything that happened. But most Germans were not in the bunker. Most Germans were in basements and refugee columns and occupied towns, trying to survive, trying to make sense of a world that had collapsed around them. For them, Hitler's death was significant, not because of who he was, but because of what it represented. The end of something, though what would come next was terrifyingly unclear. In the days after the announcement, as the news spreads and people have time to process it, reactions evolve. Initial disbelief gives way to acceptance. Initial numbness gives way to emotion, though the emotions vary wildly. Some people feel liberated. Some feel lost. Some feel both. In Hamburg, Frau Richter, who said good in the basement, goes to church 3 days later, on the first Sunday after Hitler's death. The church is full. The pastor gives a sermon about forgiveness and rebuilding. He does not mention Hitler by name. He speaks in abstractions about sin and redemption and the need to look forward. After the service, Frau Richter stands outside in the spring sunshine, looking at the ruins of her city, and cries for the first time since her son died. She's not crying for Hitler. She's crying for everything, for all of it, for the waste and the loss and the impossibility of ever making it make sense. In Berlin, Ruth Andreas Friedrich emerges from her apartment on May 3rd after the fighting in her neighborhood has stopped. Soviet soldiers control the streets. She sees the red flag flying over the Reichstag in the distance. She sees German soldiers, now prisoners, being marched away. She sees civilians beginning to emerge from cellars, blinking in the light, trying to assess the damage. Hitler is dead. The war is ending, but the city looks like the end of the world. She writes in her diary, "We survived. Now we must figure out how to live." This becomes the dominant reaction in the weeks that follow, a turn toward survival, toward reconstruction, toward the future. Hitler's death is the end of one chapter, but the next chapter is blank, terrifying, full of uncertainty. Germany in May 1945 is a country that must be rebuilt from rubble, physically and morally. The announcement of Hitler's death is the moment when Germans begin, tentatively, to confront what they have lived through and what they have enabled. But in that first moment, on May 1st, when the announcement crackles through radios across a shattered country, the reactions are as varied as the people hearing them: relief and grief, satisfaction and numbness, hope and despair, belief and disbelief. Germany in May 1945 is not one nation with one reaction. It is millions of individuals, each alone with their own reckoning. In a cellar in Cologne, a man says, "Thank God." In a bunker in East Prussia, a soldier says, "We're lost." In a farmhouse in Bavaria, a woman says, "What happens now?" In a refugee camp, a child asks, "Who was Hitler?" In a prison cell, a resistance fighter says, "Finally." In a hospital bed, a wounded veteran says, "It was all for nothing." All of these reactions are true. All of them happened. Germany's response to Hitler's death cannot be summarized in a single emotion or a single narrative. It was as fractured and complex as the country itself, as broken and contradictory as the regime that had just ended. The announcement ends. The war continues for one more week. Soviet and American troops advance. More people die. Cities burn. Refugees flee. And in basements and cellars and refugee columns across Germany, people who heard that Hitler is dead go to sleep that night and wake up the next morning and face the same question: how do we survive today? How do we go on? What do we do now? These are the questions that will define Germany for decades. But on May 1st, 1945, in the immediate aftermath of the announcement, most Germans are too exhausted, too traumatized, too focused on immediate survival to think about the long term. They hear that Hitler is dead, and they feel whatever they feel, and then they return to the work of staying alive in a country that has been destroyed. The Führer is dead. The war is ending. The reckoning is just beginning.